The text message arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how Calvin Reed, financial analyst, devoted husband, and general smartass, became the kind of man who could destroy 2 lives without breaking a single law. My name is Calvin Reed, and 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. 41 years old, decent job crunching numbers for a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Chicago, nice house in Elmhurst with the white picket fence and everything. My wife Natalie was 39, worked in marketing for a regional consulting company, and we'd been married for 12 years. The American dream, right down to the 2-car garage and the neighbors who waved from their perfectly manicured lawns. Except the dream had started feeling more like a slow-motion nightmare, and I was too stupid to see it coming. It started with little things. Natalie buying expensive clothes she claimed were necessary for work. Designer dresses that cost more than my monthly car payment, shoes that could fund a small vacation. When I asked about the sudden wardrobe upgrade, she'd roll her eyes and say something about professional image, and you wouldn't understand the corporate world. Right. Because my decade in finance had taught me nothing about professional appearances. Then came the late nights. Client dinners, she called them. Important networking events that somehow always ran until midnight and required her to dress like she was attending a Hollywood premiere. I'd lie in bed, listening to her stumble through the front door at 1 a.m, reeking of expensive wine and men's cologne that definitely wasn't mine. How was dinner? I'd ask. Fine. Boring. You know how these things are. But I didn't know, because she'd stopped inviting me to company functions months earlier. Apparently, I was too sarcastic for her colleagues. Fair enough, I did have a tendency to point out when people were full of shit, and marketing people seemed particularly susceptible to that condition. The real wake-up call came on a Friday evening in February. Chicago was buried under 2 feet of snow, the kind of weather that makes you grateful for central heating and a good bottle of whiskey. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, and listening to Natalie get ready upstairs. She was taking longer than usual, and when she finally came down, I understood why. She looked stunning. A black cocktail dress that hugged every curve, jewelry I'd never seen before, makeup applied with professional precision. She looked like a woman going on a date, not a business dinner. Wow, I said, stirring the pasta sauce. Must be some client dinner. It's important, she said, avoiding my eyes while she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Trent thinks this could lead to a major account. Trent Shepard, her boss. 46 years old, divorced twice, drove a red Maserati, and had the kind of artificial charm that made my teeth itch. I'd met him exactly once, at a company Christmas party 2 years ago, and he'd spent the entire evening talking about his golf handicap and his weekend house in Lake Geneva. The kind of guy who wore cologne to the grocery store and called everyone sport or champ. Where's this dinner happening? I asked casually. Chez Laurent, that new French place downtown. Chez Laurent. I knew it well. Had taken Natalie there for our anniversary the year before. Intimate lighting, private booths, the kind of place where conversations were conducted in whispers, and the wine list started at $60 a bottle. Not exactly the venue for a business dinner with multiple clients. Sounds fancy for a work thing. She shot me a look that could have frozen the Chicago River. Not everything is a conspiracy, Calvin. Some of us are trying to advance our careers. The implication being that I wasn't, of course, that my steady job and reliable income weren't ambitious enough for her new standards. I'd heard variations of this theme for months now, subtle digs about my lack of drive, my settling for mediocrity, my apparent inability to understand what it took to succeed in the modern business world. Have fun, I said, and meant it, because I was about to have some fun of my own. After she left, I called my best friend, Jules Martinez. Jules was a former Chicago PD detective who'd taken early retirement after a knee injury and now ran a small private investigation business. We'd known each other since college, and he was one of the few people who could match my sarcasm with his own brand of dry humor. "Reed," he answered on the second ring. "What's up?" "I need a favor. The kind that might require your professional expertise." "Ah, shit. What did Natalie do now?" Jules had never liked my wife. He'd been polite about it over the years, but I could tell he thought she was shallow and self-centered. Turned out his cop instincts were better than my husband instincts. "I think she's having an affair." "You think? Or you know?" "I think, but I want to know." There was a pause. "You sure you want to go down this road, Cal? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss." "Too late for that? I'm already suspicious, which means I'm already miserable. Might as well be miserable and informed." Jules sighed. "All right. What do you need?" "She's at Chez Laurent right now. Says it's a business dinner with her boss and some clients. I'm thinking it might be more intimate than advertised." "You want me to swing by and take a look?" "Actually, I have a better idea. Remember my in-laws?" Richard and Carol Brennan were Natalie's parents, and they were the kind of people who made Norman Rockwell paintings look edgy. Retired school teachers from Oak Park, they'd spent 40 years projecting an image of moral superiority that would make a Puritan jealous. They attended church every Sunday, volunteered at the local food bank, and had never missed sending a birthday card or anniversary gift. They also had very strong opinions about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of family values. They adored me, mostly because I laughed at Richard's terrible jokes and always complimented Carol's cooking. But more importantly, they trusted me. When I called and suggested a surprise dinner out to celebrate their upcoming anniversary, they were delighted. "Chez Laurent sounds wonderful, Calvin," Carol said. "How thoughtful of you to make reservations." 8 o'clock, I told them. "Ask for a table near the back. Better ambiance." By 8:15, my phone was ringing. "Calvin." Richard's voice was tight, controlled. "We need to talk." "Everything okay?" "No, everything is not okay. Can you come over? Tonight?" I found them in their living room, sitting on opposite ends of their floral sofa, like bookends holding up 40 years of moral certainty. Carol had been crying. Richard looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. "We saw her," Carol said without preamble. "We saw Natalie." "At the restaurant?" "With that man, her boss." Richard's jaw was clenched so tight I was worried he might crack a tooth. They were all over each other," Carol finished, "holding hands, kissing. She was sitting in his lap, Calvin. In public. Like some kind of whore," Richard said quietly. It was probably the harshest word I'd ever heard him use, and it carried the weight of complete moral condemnation. I sat down across from them, processing this confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd been right to be suspicious. But a larger part felt something else entirely. Not heartbreak exactly, more like relief. The uncertainty was over. The pretending was done. Now I could stop being the devoted husband and start being something else entirely. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said. "We're sorry too," Carol said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "You don't deserve this, Calvin. You're a good man." "What are you going to do?" Richard asked. I looked at these two decent people who'd just had their world turned upside down by their daughter's betrayal. They'd raised Natalie to be better than this, and her actions reflected on them as much as on her. In their social circle, divorce was scandalous enough. Adultery was a mark of shame that would follow them for years. "I'm going to handle it," I said. "Don't worry about that." But as I drove home through the snowy Chicago streets, I realized I had no idea what handling it actually meant. I'd never been betrayed before, never had to navigate the complex emotions of anger, hurt, and humiliation that were currently battling for control of my brain. I was a numbers guy, used to problems that had clear solutions, and predictable outcomes. This was uncharted territory. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing a whiskey and trying to figure out my next move, when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the message was clear enough. A photo of Natalie and Trent Shepard in what appeared to be a hotel room. She was wearing the black dress from dinner, but not much else. He was shirtless, and they were engaged in activities that definitely weren't covered in any employee handbook I'd ever read. The accompanying text was brief. Thought you should know. A friend. I stared at the photo for a long time, feeling something cold and calculating settle into my chest where my heart used to be. Natalie had made her choice. She'd chosen excitement over stability, flash over substance, lies over truth. She'd humiliated me, betrayed her parents, and thrown away 12 years of marriage for a middle-aged man with a sports car and a spray tan. That was her right, I supposed. People fell out of love. People made mistakes. People were selfish and stupid and human. But she'd also underestimated me. She thought I was just Calvin Reed, boring financial analyst, the kind of man who'd quietly accept his fate and shuffle off into middle-aged obscurity. She thought I'd be hurt and passive and easy to manage. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I finished my whiskey, deleted the photo, and started planning. Because if Natalie wanted to play games, I was going to teach her the rules. And the first rule was simple. Never underestimate the quiet guy who does your taxes and knows where all the money is hidden. The war was about to begin. The next morning, Natalie came home at 7:30, claiming she'd stayed at her friend Megan's house after drinking too much at dinner. She was still wearing the black dress, now wrinkled and stained, and her makeup was smeared in ways that suggested activities more vigorous than conversation over wine. "How was the client dinner?" I asked, not looking up from my coffee and newspaper. "Productive," she said, avoiding eye contact. "I think we're going to land the Morrison account." "That's great. Richard and Carol send their regards, by the way." She froze halfway up the stairs. "What?" "Your parents. I saw them last night. They mentioned running into you at Chez Laurent." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control she needed to do. "They were there?" she asked carefully. "Small world, right? They said you looked like you were having a good time with your boss." Another pause. Then, "It was business, Calvin. I can't help it if my parents don't understand professional networking." Professional networking. I had to admire her commitment to the lie, even when it was obviously pointless. She was going to brazen this out right to the bitter end. "I'm sure they don't," I agreed. "They're from a different generation. They probably don't understand how modern business relationships work." She relaxed slightly, thinking she'd navigated the conversation successfully. "Exactly. Things are different now." "Absolutely. I mean, when they told me about you sitting in Trent's lap and kissing him, I explained that it was probably just a new form of contract negotiation." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might faint or throw up or both. Then her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, defiant. "I don't know what they think they saw," she said. "They think they saw their daughter cheating on her husband in a public restaurant. Crazy, right?" "Calvin, Save it." I stood up, suddenly tired of the whole charade. "I know about Trent. I know about the hotels. I know about the clothes and the jewelry and the late nights. I know you've been screwing your boss for months while lying to my face about client dinners and professional development." She opened her mouth to deny it, then seemed to realize there was no point. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked almost relieved that the pretending was over. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." She sat down on the stairs, suddenly looking older and smaller. "What happens now?" I'd been thinking about that question all night, and I'd come to some interesting conclusions. The old Calvin, the trusting, devoted husband Calvin, would have demanded an explanation. He would have asked if she loved Trent, if their marriage meant anything to her, if there was any chance of working things out. He would have been hurt and confused and desperate to understand how they'd gotten to this point. But the old Calvin was gone, replaced by someone harder and smarter and significantly less forgiving. The new Calvin understood that explanations were just excuses, and excuses were for people who planned to forgive and forget. I had no intention of doing either. "Now you move out," I said. "Today." "Calvin, we should talk about this." "No, we really shouldn't. You made your choice. You chose Trent and his Maserati and his expense account lifestyle, so go live that life. Just don't do it here. This is my house too." "Actually, it's not." I pulled a manila folder from the kitchen counter and handed it to her. "Funny thing about being married to a financial analyst. I know exactly how assets are titled and where money comes from. This house is in my name only, purchased with my inheritance from my grandmother. The mortgage payments come from my bank account. Legally speaking, you're a guest here, and I'm asking you to leave." She opened the folder and stared at the divorce papers inside. "You've already filed?" "This morning. Jules knows a lawyer who specializes in expedited divorces. No fault, clean break, what's yours is yours, and what's mine is mine. I'm not asking for alimony or trying to take your car or your jewelry or your fancy clothes. I just want you gone. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? What about you sleeping with your boss in hotel rooms while lying to me for months?" The anger in my voice surprised both of us. I'd been trying to stay calm and rational, but something about her suggestion that this was a problem we could solve together pushed me over the edge. "You don't get to destroy our marriage and then ask me to help you fix it." She started crying then, big, dramatic tears that might have worked on the old Calvin. But the new Calvin just watched dispassionately, noting how quickly she could turn on the waterworks when she needed them. "I never meant for this to happen," she sobbed. "But it did happen, repeatedly. In hotels, in his car, probably in his office after hours." I was guessing about the specifics, but her flinch told me I was close. "You made choices, Natalie. Now you get to live with them." "Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know. Maybe Trent has room at his place. Or maybe one of your work friends can put you up until you figure things out. Not my problem anymore." She wiped her eyes, and I could see her switching tactics. The tears weren't working, so now she'd try anger. "You're being cruel." "I'm being practical. You want to know what cruel would be?" "Cruel would be me calling your company's HR department and reporting that a supervisor is having an affair with a subordinate. Cruel would be me forwarding that photo I received last night to everyone in your contact list. Cruel would be me telling your parents exactly what I think of their daughter's moral character." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't. The old me wouldn't, but you don't know the new me very well yet. The new me is full of surprises." She packed 2 suitcases and left that afternoon without saying goodbye. I watched from the kitchen window as she loaded her car, noting that she took only her most expensive clothes and jewelry. Everything else, the books, the decorative items, the little mementos from our life together, she left behind like they meant nothing to her, which I supposed they didn't. After she was gone, I called Jules. "How'd it go?" he asked. "She's out, signed the papers, packed her stuff, and left." That was easier than I expected. "Phase 1 was easy. Phase 2 is going to be more complicated." "There's a phase 2? I looked around the house that was now entirely mine, at the wedding photos I'd need to take down, and the shared memories I'd need to pack away. Natalie had gotten what she wanted, freedom to pursue her affair without the inconvenience of a husband. But she'd also gotten something she hadn't bargained for, an enemy who knew all her secrets and had nothing left to lose. "Oh, there's definitely a phase 2, I said. "She thinks this is over, but it's just getting started." Because here's what Natalie didn't understand about me, even after 12 years of marriage. I was patient, methodical, and extremely good at holding grudges. She'd humiliated me, lied to me, and thrown away our marriage for a man who drove a red sports car and called people champ. She thought she could walk away clean, start fresh with her new life, and leave me to pick up the pieces. She was wrong. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. 3 days after Natalie moved out, I got a call from Carol Brennan. "Calvin, honey, how are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Carol. Better than fine, actually. We heard about the divorce. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's for the best." There was a pause. "Richard and I feel terrible about this. If we hadn't gone to that restaurant, you'd still be wondering why your daughter was coming home at 2 a.m. smelling like another man's cologne. You did me a favor. Still, we feel responsible. Is there anything we can do?" That was exactly what I'd been hoping she'd ask. Actually, there might be. But it depends on how angry you are about what Natalie did. Another pause, longer this time. We're very disappointed in her choices. Disappointed enough to help me make sure she faces some consequences? What kind of consequences? I explained my plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Carol listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's rather harsh, Calvin." "She made her bed. I'm just making sure she has to sleep in it." "What do you need from us?" "Just your signatures on a few documents, and maybe a conversation with Natalie about family values and personal responsibility. I think we can manage that." The next phase of my plan required more research. I spent the weekend learning everything I could about Trent Shepard and his company's policies regarding workplace relationships. What I found was interesting. Shepard Marketing Solutions had a strict code of conduct that explicitly prohibited romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Violations could result in termination, loss of benefits, and forfeiture of any pending bonuses or stock options. The policy had been implemented 3 years earlier, after a harassment lawsuit that had cost the company $2 million in damages. More interesting still was Trent's employment contract, which I found through some creative research involving public records and a helpful contact at the Secretary of State's office. He was a minority partner in the firm with a significant financial stake that would be jeopardized by any ethics violations. He also had a non-compete clause that would prevent him from working for any competing firms in the Chicago area for 2 years if he was terminated for cause. In other words, if Trent lost his job over the affair, he'd be professionally and financially ruined. Perfect. On Monday morning, I made an anonymous call to the company's ethics hotline. "I'd like to report a violation of the workplace conduct policy," I told the automated system. "Please describe the nature of the violation." "A supervisor is having a private relationship with a subordinate. I have photographic evidence." The system transferred me to a human being, a woman with a crisp professional voice who took down all the relevant details. I gave her Trent's name, Natalie's name, and a detailed description of their affair, including dates, locations, and the fact that Natalie had received expensive gifts and favorable treatment in exchange for favors. "How can we verify this information?" she asked. "Check Natalie Reed's expense reports for the past 6 months. Look at her travel receipts, her hotel bills, her restaurant charges. Cross-reference them with Trent Shepard's expenses. You'll find a lot of overlap." "And you said you have photographic evidence?" "I can provide it if necessary, but I think your investigation will turn up plenty of corroborating evidence." I hung up feeling satisfied. The wheels of corporate justice were notoriously slow, but they were also thorough. Within a week, both Trent and Natalie would be under investigation. Within a month, they'd probably both be unemployed. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I drove to Trent's house in Lake Forest. It was exactly what I'd expected. A modern McMansion with a circular driveway, a 3-car garage, and landscaping that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The red Maserati was parked in the driveway like a middle-aged cry for attention. I parked across the street and waited. At 6:30, Trent emerged from the house wearing a golf outfit and carrying a set of clubs. He loaded them into the Maserati and drove off, presumably heading to his country club for an evening round. I waited another 10 minutes, then walked up to the front door and rang the bell. The woman who answered was about my age, attractive in a tired, defeated sort of way. She had the look of someone who'd been disappointed so many times that she'd stopped expecting anything better. "Can I help you?" "Are you Lana Shepard?" "Yes." "My name is Calvin Reed. I think we need to talk about your husband." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Come in." She led me to a living room that looked like it had been decorated by a professional and never actually lived in. Everything was beige and cream and perfectly coordinated. It felt like a hotel lobby. "You're Natalie's husband," she said, settling into a chair across from me. "Ex-husband, as of last week. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not." She studied my face, looking for signs of the devastation she probably expected to find. When she didn't see any, she seemed to relax slightly. "How long have you known?" I asked. "About Natalie? 3 months. About the others? Years." "Others?" "Trent has a type. Young, ambitious, willing to trade favors for career advancement. Natalie is just the latest in a long line." "That must be difficult for you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I stopped caring about Trent's affairs years ago. I care about the financial implications, though. If he loses his job over this, it affects my lifestyle." I liked Lana Shepard immediately. She was practical, unsentimental, and focused on her own interests. In other words, she was exactly the kind of ally I needed. "What if I told you there was a way to protect your financial interests while making sure Trent faces consequences for his behavior?" "I'd ask what you had in mind." I explained my plan. It was more complex than the corporate complaint, involving divorce proceedings, asset protection, and a carefully orchestrated public humiliation that would destroy Trent's reputation while preserving Lana's financial security. "You've thought this through," she said when I finished. "I'm very thorough." "What do you need from me?" "Documentation, financial records, evidence of his other affairs, and most importantly, your testimony about his pattern of behavior." "In exchange for?" "Half of whatever assets we can protect from his professional downfall, plus the satisfaction of watching him get what he deserves." She was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. Then she smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since I'd arrived. "When do we start?" We shook hands, and I knew I'd found my secret weapon. Natalie and Trent thought they were so clever, sneaking around behind our backs, playing their little games of deception and betrayal. But they'd underestimated both of us. They'd assumed we'd be hurt and passive and easy to manipulate. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The war was escalating, and I had just recruited a very powerful ally. The corporate investigation moved faster than I'd expected. By Thursday, both Trent and Natalie had been called in for formal interviews with HR and the company's legal department. By Friday, Trent was suspended pending a full review of his conduct. I learned this from Lana, who had become my primary source of intelligence about the enemy camp. She called me Friday evening, sounding almost giddy with excitement. "He came home 2 hours ago, completely panicked," she reported. "Started making phone calls to lawyers, talking about damage control and media management. He knows he's screwed." "What about Natalie?" "She called here around 4, crying and begging him to fix this. He hung up on her." "Trouble in paradise?" "You could say that. Apparently, when your affair partner becomes a professional liability, the romance fades pretty quickly." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Natalie had thrown away our marriage for a man who'd just abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. "Phase 2 starts Monday," I told Lana. "I'm ready." Phase 2 was more personal. While the corporate investigation would handle the professional consequences, I wanted to make sure there were social consequences as well. Natalie and Trent had humiliated me in private. Now I was going to return the favor in public. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. Saturday morning, I was having coffee with Jules when my phone rang. It was Megan Walsh, one of Natalie's work friends and a woman I'd never particularly liked. She had the kind of artificial friendliness that barely concealed a mean-spirited nature, and she'd always treated me like I wasn't quite good enough for their social circle. "Calvin, hi. I heard about you and Natalie. I'm so sorry." "Thanks, Megan. These things happen. I was wondering if we could get together for coffee. I have some things I think you should know about the situation." Interesting. Megan was either genuinely concerned about me, which seemed unlikely given our history, or she was fishing for information she could share with her gossip network. Either way, it might be useful. "Sure. When and where?" We met at a Starbucks in downtown Elmhurst, far enough from both our neighborhoods to provide some privacy. Megan arrived looking like she was dressed for a job interview. Carefully applied makeup, designer clothes, the works. She was clearly planning to make this conversation into a performance. "Calvin, I want you to know that some of us tried to talk Natalie out of this," she began, leaning forward conspiratorially. "We told her she was making a mistake. That was thoughtful of you. She wouldn't listen. She was completely infatuated with Trent. Said he made her feel alive again, made her feel like she was worth something. The implication being that I had made her feel worthless, of course. I kept my expression neutral, but internally I was filing away every word for future use. She said you two had grown apart," Megan continued, "that you didn't understand her ambitions, didn't support her career goals." "I see." She felt trapped in the marriage, like she was settling for less than she deserved. "And Trent represented something better? He's successful, sophisticated, worldly. He travels to Europe for business, drives that beautiful car, has connections in the industry. Natalie said being with him made her feel like she was finally living up to her potential." I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were absorbing these insights about my failed marriage. In reality, I was marveling at how thoroughly Natalie had rewritten our history to justify her affair. According to her version of events, I was the boring, unsupportive husband who'd held her back from achieving her dreams. Trent was the sophisticated older man who'd shown her what life could really be like. "Did she say anything else about our marriage?" I asked. Megan's eyes lit up. She'd been waiting for me to ask for more details, more ammunition for her gossip mill. "She said you were predictable, that you never surprised her, never did anything spontaneous or exciting. She felt like she knew exactly what the next 20 years of her life would look like, and it depressed her." "Whereas Trent was unpredictable?" "Completely. He'd surprise her with expensive dinners, weekend trips, jewelry. He made her feel special, like she was worth making an effort for. That must have been nice for her." "She deserved it, Calvin. Natalie is a beautiful, intelligent woman. She deserves to be with someone who appreciates her." And there it was, the underlying assumption that I hadn't appreciated my wife, that I'd somehow failed to recognize her value and treat her accordingly. According to this narrative, the affair wasn't really Natalie's fault. It was mine, for being boring and predictable and failing to keep her interested. "You're probably right," I said. "Maybe she's better off with Trent." Megan looked surprised. She'd clearly expected me to be more defensive, more hurt by these revelations about my inadequacies as a husband. "You're taking this very well," she said. "What's the alternative? I can't change the past, and I can't make Natalie love me if she doesn't. All I can do is move forward." "That's very mature of you." I try to be practical about these things. We finished our coffee, and Megan left looking slightly disappointed that she hadn't gotten more dramatic material for her next gossip session. But she'd given me something much more valuable than she realized. A complete picture of how Natalie had justified her betrayal to herself and her friends. That evening, I called Lana. "I need you to do something for me," I said. It might seem strange, but trust me on this. What do you need? I want you to call Megan Walsh and ask her to lunch. Tell her you're Trent's wife and you want to hear her perspective on what happened. Why would I do that? Because Megan loves to gossip, and she'll tell you everything Natalie has been saying about the affair, and then you're going to record the conversation. That's illegal without her consent. Not in Illinois. One-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. What are you planning to do with the recording? I'm going to make sure everyone in Natalie's social and professional circle knows exactly what she really thinks of the people around her. There was a pause. That's diabolical. That's justice. Lana met with Megan the following Tuesday at a trendy restaurant in Oak Brook. The conversation, which Lana recorded on her phone, was even better than I'd hoped. Megan, apparently thrilled to have a new audience for her gossip, spent 90 minutes detailing every cruel thing Natalie had said about me, her parents, her other friends, and even Megan herself. The highlights included Natalie calling me boring, describing her parents as small-minded hypocrites, and referring to Megan as desperate and pathetic. She'd also shared intimate details about our marriage, mocked my appearance and personality, and expressed contempt for what she called my middle-class values. But the most damaging revelation was Natalie's plan for the future. According to Megan, Natalie had been hoping to get pregnant by Trent, which would force him to leave his wife and marry her. She'd already stopped taking birth control and had been timing their encounters to coincide with her most fertile periods. She said once she had his baby, he'd have to choose her, Megan confided to Lana. She was so confident it would work. When I listened to the recording later that evening, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest. Natalie hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd been actively planning to trap another man into leaving his wife. She'd been playing a long game, using closeness and manipulation to achieve her goals. The old Calvin would have been hurt by these revelations. The new Calvin just saw them as ammunition. "What's next?" Lana asked when I called her back. "Now we go public." The war was about to enter its final phase, and I had everything I needed to destroy both of them completely. The company Christmas party was scheduled for the following Saturday at the Palmer House Hilton downtown. It was an annual affair that drew not just employees, but also spouses, clients, and industry contacts, essentially everyone who mattered in Chicago's marketing and consulting world. Natalie had been looking forward to this party for months, back when she thought she'd be attending as Trent's unofficial date and making her debut as his new partner. Instead, she'd be attending as an unemployed pariah whose affair had just cost the company its regional director. I, on the other hand, hadn't been planning to attend at all, but circumstances had changed, and I now had a very good reason to make an appearance. "Are you sure about this?" Jules asked as he helped me set up the equipment in my hotel room. "Once you do this, there's no taking it back." "I don't want to take it back. This is going to destroy her completely, her career, her reputation, her relationships, everything." "Good." Jules looked at me with something that might have been concern. "You're not the same guy I used to know, Cal. The guy you used to know was a sucker. He trusted people who didn't deserve it and got played for his kindness. I'm an improvement." "If you say so." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Lana had used her connections to get me invited to the party as her guest. I'd arrive fashionably late, after Natalie and Trent had already made their awkward appearances as the subjects of ongoing corporate scandal. Then I'd give a little presentation that would ensure their humiliation was complete and permanent. I spent the afternoon preparing, reviewing my notes, and testing the equipment one more time. Everything had to be perfect. I'd only get one chance at this, and I intended to make it count. At 7:30, I put on my best suit and headed downtown. The Palmer House ballroom was packed with Chicago's marketing elite, all dressed in their holiday finest and pretending the recent scandal hadn't rocked their professional community. I spotted Natalie almost immediately. She was standing near the bar, looking uncomfortable and isolated. Her usual circle of friends seemed to be avoiding her, and she kept checking her phone as if waiting for someone to rescue her from the social exile. Trent was across the room, surrounded by a small group of men who appeared to be offering condolences or advice. He looked haggard and older than his 46 years, like a man who'd just watched his carefully constructed life collapse in real time. Perfect. I found Lana near the silent auction tables, looking elegant in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Ready for this?" she asked. "More than ready. The AV equipment is set up in the anteroom. Hotel staff thinks you're giving a presentation about the company's charitable giving." "Close enough." At 8:15, I made my move. I'd asked the hotel staff to announce that there would be a brief presentation about recent developments in the company, and most of the crowd had gathered near the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Natalie and Trent were both in the audience, looking confused and nervous. I took the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, colleagues, clients, friends, and enemies all gathered together for what they thought would be a routine corporate presentation. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Calvin Reed, and I want to talk to you about integrity." I could see Natalie's face go white. Trent looked like he was about to be sick. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what integrity meant. I thought it meant being honest with your spouse, faithful to your commitments, and respectful of the people who trust you. I thought it meant taking responsibility for your actions and treating others the way you'd want to be treated. The crowd was listening intently now, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical corporate speech. But then I learned that some people have a different definition of integrity. Some people think integrity means lying to your husband while you sleep with your boss. Some people think integrity means using closeness to advance your career while mocking the people who love you behind their backs. Murmurs started rippling through the crowd. People were looking around, trying to figure out what was happening and why someone was giving this speech at a Christmas party. Some people think integrity means planning to get pregnant by your married boss so you can trap him into leaving his wife. Some people think integrity means calling your husband boring and your parents small-minded hypocrites while they're supporting you through your adultery. Natalie was pushing through the crowd now, trying to reach the stage, but Jules appeared beside her and gently but firmly guided her back to her spot. Trent looked frozen, unable to move or speak. "But here's what I've learned about real integrity," I continued. "Real integrity means facing consequences for your actions. It means accepting responsibility for the pain you've caused. And it means understanding that when you betray people who trust you, those people have every right to make sure everyone knows exactly who you really are." I nodded to the hotel technician, who started playing the audio recording of Megan's lunch with Lana. Natalie's voice filled the ballroom, clear and unmistakable, as she mocked me, her parents, her friends, and everyone else in her life. The crowd listened in stunned silence as she detailed her plans to trap Trent with a pregnancy and described her contempt for the boring middle-class people who made up her social circle. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. "That was my ex-wife, Natalie Reed, sharing her thoughts with her close friend Megan Walsh," I said. "The man she was talking about trapping is Trent Shepard, who's here tonight with his wife Lana. The boring husband she was mocking is me." I looked directly at Natalie, who was crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. "Natalie, you wanted excitement. You wanted unpredictability. You wanted someone who would surprise you." I smiled. Surprise. I handed the microphone back to the hotel staff and walked off the stage. The crowd was still silent, processing what they'd just heard. Then the whispers started, building into a crescendo of shocked conversation and nervous laughter. Natalie ran from the ballroom, pushing past people who tried to stop her. Trent followed a moment later, his face red with humiliation and rage. I found Lana by the coat check, looking satisfied and slightly amazed. "That was incredible," she said. "You just destroyed both of them in front of everyone who matters in their professional world." "That was the idea." "What happens now?" "Now they live with the consequences. Natalie will never work in marketing again, at least not in Chicago. Trent's reputation is ruined, and his business relationships are probably finished. They'll both have to start over somewhere else, assuming they can find anyone willing to hire them after tonight. And you? What do you do now? I looked around the ballroom at the crowd that was still buzzing with conversation about what they'd just witnessed. Some people were looking at me with admiration, others with fear, and a few with something that might have been respect. Now I go home and start the next chapter of my life, I said. One that doesn't include liars, cheaters, or people who mistake kindness for weakness. I walked out of the Palmer house feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I could hear the crowd still talking, still processing the dramatic end to Natalie and Trent's affair. By Monday morning, everyone in Chicago's business community would know exactly what had happened and why. Natalie had wanted excitement and unpredictability. She'd gotten both, just not in the way she'd expected. She'd also learned something important about the quiet, boring husband she'd betrayed. When pushed too far, even the most patient man could become absolutely ruthless. The war was over, and I had won decisively. Calvin Reed, financial analyst and devoted husband, was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and completely uninterested in being anyone's victim ever again. As I walked through the snowy Chicago streets toward my car, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge, it turned out, was a dish best served in front of 200 witnesses at a Christmas party. And it tasted absolutely perfect.